Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Information Playground. This is Ron Bush, and I hope you're ready for an excellent program today. Kurt Roemer is our guest, but before that, I want to encourage you, if you're listening to us in Northwest Indiana, you can stream us on WVLP. That's WVLP FM, and their website is WVLP.org. They do a great deal of work in the community, and I would encourage you to listen to them. You can stream them from their website or go to their FM place on the dial, which is 103.1 FM. If you're listening to this on demand, there's a number of ways that you can do it. You can go to any of your favorite podcast platforms. That would be Spotify, Apple Podcast, Google Podcast. There's a host of them, and I think we're on most of them. Also, you can find us on YouTube, and the name of the channel in both cases for podcast and YouTube is the Information Playground. And we are dedicated to educating people in technology, helping people to stay safe online. As regular listeners know, my name is Ron Bush, and I own Ron Bush Consulting. We are a company that helps other companies and organizations stay safe on the web. We're a cybersecurity company. And indeed, we're underwriting this program. So without further ado, we've got our great guest today is Kurt Roemer, and Kurt is with Citrix. Kurt, would you tell the folks a little bit about yourself?
Sure, Ron. Hi, everyone. I'm Kurt Roemer, Chief Security Strategist for Citrix. I'm also a member of our CTO office and responsible for future state security, which includes confidentiality, integrity, availability, safety, and privacy, of course, these days.
That's right. We run in a lot of the same circles. So we've got an interesting time here. We're in the middle, I think, of a pandemic known as the coronavirus, also COVID-19 is its proper name. And I don't know when you folks are listening to us, but as we record this, most of the country, if not all of it by now, is on lockdown. People are working from their homes that can. And so both of us thought, Kurt and I both thought it would be a great idea to talk about how to stay secure while working from home. So with that as an introduction, Kurt, what are some major changes that you see need to happen for security and privacy for those of us that are now working from home?
Yeah, Ron, more than ever before, you're really your first line of defense. If you're one of the displaced workers that's been sent home for the first time, you're dealing with a lot of things, and you're protecting your home, you're protecting yourself and your interests, you're protecting your family as well as your customers and your livelihood. And it's a lot more than just some information security aspects. There's a lot that we all are dealing with, need to be thinking about, and need to be leveraging and learning from each other.
I couldn't agree more. How should people be thinking about working from home to protect themselves and their families?
Really, as you take a look at that, we've got major changes from what happened in the corporate office, where you've got physical protections, you've got the social protections of the office. You oftentimes have an IT group that is helping you to provide for your technology and the network and keep all of that up and running. With many people being very hastily moved to home, a lot need to think about that in new ways. So really one of the first things you want to do is increase your security intelligence to be continuously situationally aware and contextually risk appropriate. And what I mean by that is you know what's going on around you at all times, and you're doing just the right amount of the right things so that you're protecting the security and privacy of yourself, your organization, and your customers. Make sure you're practicing good physical, cyber, and good cyber hygiene, and you're aware. You're thinking across everything that concerns you, and not just the security aspects of your job. In fact, I like to reference the NIST, National Institute of Standards and Technology, their cybersecurity framework, which has 5 very basic steps: identify, protect, detect, respond, and recover. guess what? You're now responsible for aspects of all of those.
Mhm. Excellent. Well said. You mentioned a term that I'm familiar with, but I don't know if all our listeners are, and it was hygiene. Um, let's go, before we go to a list of essential things to help us, technical things, let's talk a little bit. What is good hygiene?
Good hygiene is really doing the basics to make sure that you're protected, that you're staying safe, that you're warding off external threats, and that you're really being aware of them and preparing ahead of time. In our personal worlds, it's having toothpaste and using it, brushing off and flossing, washing your hands. And by the way, these are also great things to do working from home. Continue. Maybe people can brush their teeth more than they could when they were in the office. So there might be somewhat of a benefit to this. We'll see. But especially if you've got others in your new home office, that hygiene includes cleaning your personal space and making sure that the mouse and keyboard and desk around you and everything else is appropriately cleaned and sanitized, and making sure, especially if you're in a more shared environment, you're paying much more attention to that than you otherwise might have.
There's a difference between an employer who sends its employees home with in corporate devices, let's say laptops and maybe cell phones. Maybe instead he's worked up a virtual phone, as opposed to the employer who sends his employees home and they use their own personal devices. You also have an issue where you have connections. In a normal home, everybody uses the same internet connection. So you'll have the kids with their devices, smartphones, tablets, laptops, whatever else they may use, maybe gaming computers, Xbox, you name it. You'll have in a home with both mom and dad, you'll have them with their devices. Usually I find the security, even in offices, small offices, the password for the router will be the one that came from the manufacturer. Netgear is often admin and a blank password. So if you can identify the router, and if they haven't taken out the SSID, you can, because it says it. Now you know the model of the router. You know that they haven't changed the password, and you're in and own it. Whether it's in a strip mall or it's in a residential area, it's the same operation. What advice do you have, I guess, for the employee? Maybe they're not the IT guy in the office. Maybe it's a small to mid-sized company and they don't have an IT guy. What kind of let's talk a little bit about hygiene, I guess, as you approach the internet with that in mind.
When you look at the home network, there's a lot of things to think about. Oftentimes, your network provider is going to be able to give you some good steps to follow to make sure that you're securing the network. And typically, they will tell you how to provide for a strong password on your router, turn on encryption, and thwart the ability for others to join your network unless you've specifically invited them. By the way, if you've got kids and others on your network, now is probably a great time to change that network password so that all your kids' friends don't have it anymore. Let's face it, we all need the bandwidth these days, right? So check with your internet provider. They can give you some really great tips there on securing it as well. But there are also administrative interfaces to these routers that are available externally, and it's very important that you turn that off. And it's a process called hardening. It's where you go in and you answer some basic questions and really configure your router so that it's more specific to purpose, especially now that you're working from home, that it's patched and up to date, and that it can't be particularly attacked from the outside or accessed by people who you didn't intend. There's so much more that can be done. And for people who work with sensitive data, you really should have a separate network. If you're working with healthcare data or financial services, you work in legal, you've got very confidential information you're working with, it's probably best for you to get a separate internet line or use a personal hotspot off your phone, or purchase one directly from one of the cellular carriers, or get one from work. It's one of the ways that you can help to make sure that others aren't on your network.
Excellent, excellent. Any other technical things to reinforce that come to mind?
Yeah, it really spans the gamut, and looking at your physical space, you want to make sure that you're not giving away information on your camera about you, your environment, your location. You're not taking pictures of your workspace and sharing those that might have your exact latitude and longitude on there, that somebody could find you via GPS. A lot of people don't realize that that metadata is there in all the pictures. Make sure that you're turning off confidential information in the background. And especially if you're getting on a web meeting and you're going to be showing your screen, don't have your email up and all your notifications, and have things that others could take an instant screenshot and put it out on Twitter and be able to embarrass you. Physical space as well. Many of us in the office had shredders or people who came and took sensitive printed information. Make sure you're disposing of that appropriately, and thinking about that, thinking about leaving it lay around, especially as you might have people coming in to clean your home or fix the furnace or air conditioning or whatever else. You really don't know what's going on, and you really need to increase your situational awareness quite a bit and consider more threats than otherwise may have been there in the past, especially if you're what I call a high value target, somebody where somebody from the outside would say, hey, there's somebody who's got some information that might be valuable to me, and let me go see if I can get it.
Let's switch gears just for a moment. Browsers. Browsers are often called a threat vector. Talk a little bit about that, and how people can protect themselves.
Yeah, browsers are a very special use case, because your web browser is really the focal point of modern computing. You use it for everything from social media, you use it for web-based video conferencing, you use it for email in a lot of cases, and you also use it for a lot of sensitive enterprise apps. That very same browser, if it's the one you're using off your laptop or your smartphone or your tablet, can be very deeply connected to your file system, your network, your Windows registry, your passwords, your certificate chain. It's got access to your camera, your microphone. And if you think about it, that browser has access to basically all of your secrets and everything that could give away your privacy.
Yeah.
That's huge. Most people don't think of the browser that way. And really, because of that, you need to think of the browser as a threat in a lot of cases, and not install all the extensions that you might have had for all the games that you might have played in the past. Take and wipe your browser out, reinstall it, and harden it. Reinstall it with very minimal settings, and go through and security harden so that it's helping to protect work. And make sure as well that you're not just clicking on random links. We've all been told not to do that, but it's even more difficult these days when people are going to send you news items and things that might be hot that you want to know about right away. So you're going to maybe click on something that you otherwise might have thought about. Or working from home, you can't really identify somebody by going down the hall and asking them a question. How do you make sure that you can verify somebody's identity when they're calling you, or they're on a video chat, or they're sending you an email, before you take an action that might have security or privacy implications? These are very important things to think about, and the browser doesn't make that any more easy. From a corporate perspective, there's a lot of things you can do to lock down your browser, use different browsers that are specific to purpose. Maybe use a one-time use cloud-hosted browser, so that if it was a phishing or ransomware link that you clicked on, sure, sorry, you clicked on it, that was bad, but it opened up in a one-time use browser out in the cloud that's not connected to all the stuff I talked about before, and therefore the phishing or ransomware attack didn't go anywhere. It's a little more difficult for individuals at home, and I would say probably have a separate trusted system for your finances and your healthcare and others, and have another one that you back up and restore and rebuild pretty often, especially if the kids are using it for their school and their play and everything else, so that people who are clicking on things in browsers don't cause major problems. And there are ways to harden personal browsers and be able to containerize new browser instances, but they're not really easy for people at home to do. Hopefully that's something that we're going to see change very soon, because we all need that level of protection these days.
I think we were talking, I think, before we started, and you mentioned that there may be some benefits from all of this, and I agree. I agree completely. I think you have to look at the positive. There's an awful lot of negatives, and in my world, it seems no end to the negatives.
Yeah.
But I do hope that one of the things that will come from this is that people will have more of a mind for security, more attention given on both sides, from the manufacturer side and developer side. I think most of the Internet of Things have absolutely no security on them at all, or if they do, it's so weak it's basically non-existent. But
somebody can hack your house through your doorbell. That's a problem.
Yeah, or your smart thermostat or your smart refrigerator or any of that. It is absolutely crazy. We put ourselves in harm's way that way. But then the other side of it is people. I do presentations a lot, employee training and conference speaking and those kind of things. I find that the average person thinks, it's not going to happen to them. It's always the other guy. Forgetting that to the rest of the world, you're the other guy. But they also think that it just it's not a big thing. B, there isn't anything I can do about it. And the main thing is that it won't happen. I'm too small. I'm too insignificant. My business is too small. There's all these justifications for not doing it. And at the end of the day, you're still responsible. And there are a zillion things you can do. Not all of them cost money. I think all of them do cost time, but there's always things you can do. And I hope what comes out of this is a realization that everybody needs to be responsible for this.
Yes.
So.
Yeah, it's very much a shared responsibility model. And many folks who worked in corporate offices were able to rely on their IT department and their IT security department, and sometimes way too often. We really need to consider them as critical, trusted resources these days, but we need to be supporting them with information as well. And we need to be much more situationally aware ourselves. And yes, any and all of us can be a target, either directly or indirectly, or be a jumping point for somebody to get to somebody else in our sphere of influence. So we really have to think about that. Plus, all of us have things that we care about that are represented digitally. We've got to make sure that we're protecting those as well.
Well said. So we're using Zoom to do this meeting today, and Zoom has gotten an awful lot of press lately. Zoom bombing is a term that didn't exist a few weeks ago. Now it's in common parlance, I guess. But Zoom bombing is well. Let me say first off, I've got a friend who has Zoom as a client. He's in the security industry, and he was saying that in going back a month, Zoom had like 10,000 clients. They were probably could have used better security even then, but not 10,000, 10 million clients. For 10 million clients, they weren't that bad. In a span of 3 weeks, they went from 10 million to 200 million. And now first off, the responsibilities and the scope or area of that you've got to secure now is much larger. But the other thing is you're on people's radar screen that never paid any attention to you before. And again, regular listeners of this program will have heard me say, part of the battle is not being on the wrong guy's radar screen. Nobody's hack proof. The NSA is proof of that. So you just have to approach it with the idea that you do the best you can and try to keep a low profile in some respects. And that's something Zoom simply wasn't able to do. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's very unfortunate with Zoom, because they were there at the right time to help a lot of people as they worked from home, and we're trying to communicate with loved ones across the globe. And it's been a great service for many people, minus, of course, the security aspect. There are a lot of other services out there that provide for web conferences and meetings and allow you to communicate and collaborate with each other. Make sure that you do your due diligence and check on ones that are trusted for the communication that you're having. And typically your employer will have a very short list of those.
Mhm.
Zoom has been banned by several different governments and organizations and school districts throughout the world now, and I imagine that's going to continue. But I do see some real positives coming out of them in terms of recognizing the problem with encryption, with the way that people were joining meetings, with some of the data they were sharing with third parties, and also getting Alex Stamos on board to help make sure that they're getting some expert advice for getting this straightened out. I see it trending positive, but it shows all of us just exactly what can happen and how we've got to make sure that we vet a lot of these services and make sure that they're risk appropriate, that they're able to handle what we're throwing at them from a sensitive data perspective, and or exposing our children, which is probably a bad way to state that, but yes. Um, you know, it's similar to the problem that we saw with a lot of the personal file sharing services over the past few years as well. You can read the terms of services, you can see what information they share. Most people don't do that. Most people don't have ways to go through and do vulnerability assessments and pen testing against them and vet it. I think one of the positives that might come out of this is we'll have more of a seal of approval on some of these services of, here are the things that are more enterprise grade, or here's the things that can be utilized more with sensitive data. And looking forward to seeing some of that, because being able to assess trust, especially for some of these applications, is difficult. And we see that with many people who go and install the app of the day on their mobile phones and then realize later, hey, wait a second, that app has access to everything. Why is my data all over the place? Well, guess what?
Exactly. Well said. I appreciate that. We keep talking about smartphones and apps. Let's talk about mobile devices, smartphones, tablets. Insights on protecting our personal devices while working from home.
Yeah, as I had mentioned, the app of the day problem is a big one. Be very, very careful about what you install on your phone and what privileges it has. As we went to kick off this meeting, of course, I have a completely separate device that I'm doing this on that is not one of my normal devices that I would normally utilize. I had to very specifically turn the camera on. I will turn it off afterwards, and I will be deleting some things. I've got a pretty low threshold for security pain, so I want to make sure that I'm taking every step possible. Now, most people would not be able to do that, and just be very careful as you install apps that you're not giving them too many privileges. Least privilege is a big term in security circles, and it's something you need to think about. Do I really need to use this? What are the implications back behind it if something was lost? And what are the absolute minimum level of privileges I can turn on for this app to access if I really, really do need to use it? That's huge, especially on mobile.
That is so well said. I'm going to stop our direction here for just a moment, because when you're talking about that, it brings to mind, again, the small to mid-sized business. Can't tell you how many offices I've walked into, looked at the server, and everybody has administrator privileges.
Oh, yes.
If that's the way your office is set up, and I've got nothing to base this on, but I would say 90% of my encounters, of my experience, and maybe it's 75, 80, but I think 90. It's just huge. Of the ones that I've looked at, it amazes me that no thought is given to the minimal privileges that employee needs to do their job. On the one hand. On the other hand, I understand that it's complicated, and if you've got any kind of turnover at all, that means you've got to deal with that every time an employee either leaves, comes on, or gets promoted and now needs new privileges. So I get it. but it's one of those things that leads to all kinds of problems. So minimal privileges is something that needs to be carried through when you're talking IT. I mean, it's different in social. You want to be as high up on the pecking order or the ladder, I guess, as you can. But in IT, minimal privileges is the name of the day or the game of the day.
Yeah, it really is. And it goes back to cyber hygiene. One of the biggest problems that I see personally is people who set up their laptops and their administrator on those laptops.
Mhm.
Administrator can make any change, install any application, be able to modify everything across the board. And that means malware, and bad guys can do the same thing. Um, we really all need to be running in a least privilege model across the board. And probably one of the biggest ones is on any of your laptops, any of your desktops, your devices, don't run as administrator unless you absolutely have to make critical updates or install critical applications. Run as a normal user with least privilege every day. You're going to have a lot less chance of malware actually destroying your life.
Yeah, well said. So we've talked about some threats and attacks. Let's talk about where others are coming from. What other places do we need to watch out for? You mentioned social media earlier.
Yeah, we talked a little bit about browsers. We talked about social media, clicking on links, videos, other things that could be running in the background. The attacks are mostly coming in through email, though. And when you look at business email compromise, and you look at phishing, and you look at ransomware, a lot of the organizations and individuals that have been impacted because of a link in email. And it goes back to what I said before about being able to open up a one-time use browser. If you've got a link in email, it should not open up in the browser on your laptop that's connected to everything that you own and all the digital ways that can mess with you. You really need to have that open up in a one-time use session. And that's something you'll need to talk to your IT department about, especially if you work with sensitive data.
Excellent. Well said. Eh, I'm going to circle back to social media. You mentioned it in terms of service. A few years ago, I haven't had a Facebook account for 4 years, I think, maybe 5. But I did in the beginning when it first came out. And, I'll have to admit, when I don't know how long Facebook has come out, but it took me a while to get to it. But then when I did, I probably didn't read the terms of service to begin. But before I left Facebook, I did. It was 95 pages. And and the bottom line through it is they own it all. I mean, it's their app. Anything you put there belongs to them. So I can't say that I'm on much other social media. You and I live in the world where we try not to do that um, because of the dangers. Address those for a moment, if you will. It's not just a matter that you don't think Facebook will do anything bad with your data. It's a matter of when Facebook gets hacked, and they do on, I won't say often, but they do. Um, what's the criminal going to do that hacked them with your data? He's going to do something probably you won't appreciate. If you would run with that ball for a little bit.
Yeah, it's interesting when you look at social media. It goes back to one of my favorite quotes. If the product is free, you are the product. I should look up and see who that is so I can give them appropriate kudos. But always have enjoyed that. It's really very true, and you generate a tremendous amount of rich data on any of these social media networks. About yourself and what you've contributed, about your family, about your friends, your relationships, your likes, your interests, your dislikes. Um, Many apps in the background are also sharing data with Facebook, and using Facebook as an authentication mechanism to get to the app helps share that info as well. So realize that it's kind of incestuous how all of this data is being pulled back and forth. And if you haven't read the terms of service and looked at what's actually happening under the covers, you might not be aware of how far your data is actually going. We saw a little bit of that with Cambridge Analytica and some of the things that came up recently, and how Facebook's been identifying further issues and dealing with those, it all gets back to what's your privacy worth and what's your family's privacy worth. It's why many of us maintain a very minimal social media relationship and presence. It's something that can be very powerful for connecting people and sharing information, but it can also be very powerful for attackers because they know more about you than probably anybody else on the planet, and maybe more than you know yourself.
Yeah. It amazes me that people who cry about confidentiality and privacy issues will go on, I don't mean to just pick on Facebook, but they'll go on social media and they will tell things that they wouldn't tell the guy next door to them, but they'll tell the whole world at large.
Yes.
It just amazes me that people don't think about that. And forget the bad guys that are out there. One of the recent things I've read is there are 8 billion people on this planet. If you assume 1% of them are cyber criminals, well, you've got 8 million. 8 million people that are networked mostly on the dark web, where they have access to just about everything. Everything that's known about us is there because Axiom's been hacked. All the social media have been hacked. The government's been hacked. There's, I, you know, Bob Mueller is quoted 10, 12 years ago when he was FBI director. There's only two kinds of companies in America: those that have been hacked and those that will be hacked. Very famous line and very accurate then and now. So when you give everything away as far as data about you, how can you not expect? I mean, intelligent people don't think this through. How can you not expect that to fall in the wrong hands? It's beyond me. I need to take a quick break so that we can identify the station. So bear with me for just a moment, Kurt. You are listening to the Information Playground, and we are brought to you in a number of ways. If you're listening to us in Northwest Indiana, I hope you're listening to WVLP. If you have a chance, go on their website, wvlp.org. They do a lot of great stuff in the community, and you can find a way that you can be involved. We're aired on WVLP at 8 a.m. on Monday mornings and 1 p.m. on Friday afternoons. You'll also find us on different podcast, platforms, Spotify, Apple Podcast, Google Podcast, and there's a host of others under the Information Playground. And you'll find this on YouTube as well under the Information Playground. And I thank you for listening today. I'm Ron Bush with Ron Bush Consulting. And if you have any questions about the program or would like to be involved as a sponsor, you can write me at ronbushconsulting.com. So thank you for being with us today. Kurt, let's jump back in. What about people, and you alluded to this early on when we were talking about something else, people who work with particularly sensitive data in healthcare, finance, research, and other high security areas. What can they do?
Yeah, it's definitely something to consider as people are working from home with this very sensitive data. What were the protections that you had in the office that are no longer there anymore? From the physical side, from the network side, from your system, and from your interactions. And if you're somebody who works with personally identifiable information, which can be, your HR department, your legal department, a lot of your consultants, if you're working with PHI or protected healthcare information, if you're working with PCI, payment card information, or just intellectual property, you really have to realize that you are more of a high value target and you're somebody who has to protect that data, typically with some contractual obligations or some regulatory obligations or both. Mm-hmm. And so with that, the best practices are don't use your home PC for any of that information. No access to that information, no usage of that information. That really begs a special purpose system, either a very locked down corporate system that they've provided you, or get something separate like a Chromebook that you can be able to harden and get into those systems, and hopefully utilize something like app or desktop virtualization to keep the data off of those systems in the first place, and keep any information that might be on your system as an end user from going back up to the web or going out to third-party applications. Virtualization provides a great level of abstraction to allow people to work with sensitive data and be able to meet the needs of compliance and audit and others, even in a work from home situation.
Well said. I guess let's move on. What are the resources that people should reference to stay up to date on threats and protective measures?
Really, if you work in a corporate environment, your first resource should be your IT department and your IT security department. Make sure you've read through the policies again, and particularly if there's a work from home policy or an employee agreement that you're reading and going, wow, this is wildly different over the last few weeks than what I signed when I came on board. Bring it up, because organizations that haven't reflected and renewed their policies probably should. You're prohibiting employees from doing things that are essential in their job via your policies these days. Little tidbit many aren't thinking about. Secondly, your trusted advisors and consultants. And if you're a small to mid-sized business or an individual, find somebody who can help you, and somebody you can trust and work with them. And they can leverage on some information from the Small Business Administration, SBA.gov, the FBI, FBI.gov. You can even look at the PCI organization, the payment card industry, which is PCISecurityStandards.org. They've got a lot of great information in there on how to protect sensitive information and how to set up your networks, and especially some great resources for small businesses. Individuals can get info from their carriers, from their internet providers, and from Microsoft and Apple and Google and others like that.
Excellent, excellent. I'm so glad that you alluded to policy. Again, regular listeners will know that I tend to harp on an information security policies and procedures. In this day and age, but in every day and age, honestly, the days when you can go hang a shingle and expect people to know that you're in town and people are going to come and honor your establishment, those days have been gone for a long time. We're all on the internet, and we're all in a global economy. There's just so many things at play. If you don't have a business continuity plan, if you don't have a disaster preparedness and recovery plan, and it is part of those or on its own, an information security policies and procedures, you just are asking. None of us know when disaster will happen, but you're asking for chaos when it does. You can think these things through. You can get them in writing, and you can do regular. I'm a big fan of weekly meetings, 10, 15 minutes a week or more often, but at least that. You can go through one section, and now you've accomplished two things. You've made your employee know what the policy is and that there is one. You've made it accessible to them so they know where to get it, because no one's going to remember all of that stuff. When you have a data breach is the wrong time to ask, oh, what are we supposed to do in a data breach? If you haven't given that thought, it's too late to figure it out, especially if the way you find out is the FBI knocks on your door and says, we found your data on the dark web. That's the wrong time to say, gee, I wish I had written an information security policy and procedure. So you've got to think of this stuff ahead of time. And I know that now is a bad time to do it, but quite honestly, I don't know that there is a good time. It's always the thing that you put on the back burner because there's other stuff you want to do. It's not the most popular thing to do, and it's not pleasurable, but it's the thing that saves you when you do have a disaster like a pandemic or a fire or tornado or hurricane or whatever that disaster might be, or you're on the wrong end of a terrorist attack. Sony didn't know, it wasn't any the wiser on this stuff till they got attacked, and all of their information was out, not on the dark web, but on the World Wide Web. none of this stuff feels good when you do it, but when you are prepared for it, now, not only are you successful and come through, you may not come through, I guess, um, without any bruises or bumps, but at least you'll come through most likely. It gives you a chance. Without that, you have no chance whatsoever.
Mhm.
Um, Ransomware comes to mind as we talk about this. I read just the other day, 1 in 5 um, cyber criminals that attack with ransomware, even once they get paid, they don't provide the decryption key. That's 20%. So if you're not prepared for ransomware, and backups is your first step on that, if you're not prepared for ransomware when it happens, the only choice you have is either pay and hope you get the decryption key, or don't pay and you're out of business if if you haven't prepared for it. So preparation is a huge part of this, and thinking through is a huge part of this. Any other thoughts, insights? Uh,
Yes, policy is definitely not very popular and something that most people just dread reading. Um, I would welcome people to talk to their manager about policies that may have changed when you're working from home. Now that we're all over the shock of, wow, I'm adapting to this, I'm figuring this out, I've got connectivity, we've got to start thinking about how we can optimize our security, our privacy, our productivity, and really our overall employee experience. Policy is one of those ways. Don't worry, I'm not going to launch into a huge diatribe on this, even though I would love to. For individuals who are looking at this and want to be able to do just the basics and really understand what it means for them, I'd go back to the NIST cybersecurity framework. You've got identify, detect, protect, respond, recover. And when you think through all of those, how are you going to go through and identify all the things that might threaten you, or all the things that are important, or all the things that you should be spending time and money investing in, making sure that you're protecting them for security and privacy? Protect, do you have all the protective measures in place? Have you thought this through from a physical perspective, from your devices, from your networks, from the way that you work and how you let people into your home and vet them? From a detect perspective, probably one of the areas most of us are weakest at. Security professionals would say, review your logs and look through everything on your device. Yeah, very few people can actually even do that. So anti-malware is probably one of the best ways to provide for some detection capabilities. It's very necessary, but it doesn't catch everything. And so it's necessary but insufficient. And we've got to make sure that we've got other ways to detect that threats are coming in and be able to thwart them. Once again, talk to your IT department, your consultants, and find good ways. I find that that's one area that people are particularly lacking in. Responding is another one. Many folks in the past thought, well, had a problem, IT's there to respond. Well, not necessarily these days. You might be dealing with this on a deeply personal level. It might be your healthcare information that got stolen off of your system, along with corporate information that you were working on, and maybe some sensitive data there. You need to know, who do you make that first call to? Is it to your corporate attorney and say, under client attorney privilege, I need to have the following conversation, and start off like that so that you've got some level of protection for yourself, your organization, your customers. Know ahead of time, especially if you work with sensitive data, how to do that. And then from a recover perspective, personally, how are you going to recover your backups? From the corporate side, where are you on the list of people if your organization gets hit with ransomware and your VPN is spread it to everybody and all your endpoints? Are you going to be back day one, or are you going to be back day 21? And what do you do in between?
mm-hmm.
There's a lot to think about there. And it's quite a bit different now that we're not all in the office.
Yes, indeed it is. Which is another. I mean, all of that is great. And by the way, I'm okay with diatribes on policies and procedures. Regular listeners would have heard me do that very thing. You will. So many things are going through my head as you were talking. You've got websites. Your company website is another entry point. You've got communication. When everyone is in their home office, um, the ability to just have ad hoc conversations and brainstorming or ideas gathering, that doesn't happen now. Everyone's in their own, not cubicle, but their own home. And
Hmm.
unless you're using something like Zoom, some sort of virtual meeting tool, uh, you're not going to be able to see people face to face. Even if you use virtual phone systems that have a bridge where you can do a conference call, Uber conference. I think it's Uber conference. I don't use it, but I think it's. I think that's the one of them. Um, that's one way to do it, but you've got to be intentional about that. Otherwise,
Yes.
people are just off on their own and meetings don't happen and conversations that used to happen don't happen. And you don't realize the value of those until somebody falls off a cliff or the company gets damaged somehow as a result of that.
Yeah, very true. And it's helpful to look people in the eyes, and particularly these days, touch base with your team. Anxiety has been a huge issue, as many of us have seen the news and everything that's happening from a health perspective, from a financial perspective, from companies making wild changes, and lots of things happening internationally. Anxiety is something that we need to be addressing with our teams, and being able to do that face to face is the best way.
Mhm.
So yeah, get on those video conference calls often. Make sure that you're addressing those issues, and particularly if you're working with anything sensitive and you want to have that conversation and be able to validate somebody, turn the camera on as well.
Excellent, excellent. I'm going to take one last quick pause and remind everyone who they're listening to and how. And when we come back, I'm going to ask you, Kurt, for final thoughts, any advice, anything that comes to mind that you think is important for us to cover here before we end.
Sure.
So with that, folks, you're listening to the Information Playground. It's underwritten by Ron Bush Consulting, and I'm Ron Bush. You can reach me at ron@ronbushconsulting.com. You can catch us on WVLP, which is a Northwest Indiana radio station, rather. They are a public radio station, and they do a lot of good stuff in the community. I hope you check out their website. You can stream from that website, wvlp.org, or if you're local to the station, you're 103.1 FM. On the on-demand side of things, you can catch us on podcasting platforms like Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, and the like. Or you can catch us on YouTube, and I hope you will. You get to see Kurt and he's got a nice beard there, and mine's a lighter color than yours, actually. So I haven't worn a beard in years, but I used to enjoy it. So you can catch us on YouTube. Both podcast and YouTube channels are the Information Playground. So thank you for being with us today. Kurt, final thoughts?
Yeah, Ron, you've asked some really great questions and definitely some things to reflect on. If you've got other people who are working with you in your new home office, talk to them about these as well. See what their thoughts are, see where their risk tolerance is, and particularly with kids, give them some resources to help them. They're not getting a lot of the reinforcement that they might have gotten through a very regimented program at school, but the school is probably still there to help you and help the kids stay safe while they're at home these days. And there's a lot of other great resources for that. Definitely look those up and concentrate on the other folks that are working with you and surviving through this together. One of the things that I also want to bring up is, as we're looking through a lot of the advice that has been shared here, many of this might be daunting for an individual. There's quite a bit of things to address now that you're your own network manager, you're your own chief information officer, you're your own chief security officer in a lot of ways. Sure, you've got others that can depend on, but guess what? The buck stops here. You're your own firewall, and you've really got to be thinking in those ways. Start thinking about some of the highest risk environments and highest risk data that you're working with, and attack those first. Don't try to boil the ocean and go after everything. But also, if you're thinking about, you may be one of these folks who are going to be working from home for a while, and this might be something that might be the new normal for you. I'd like you to go out and take a look at a blog that I put together on protecting the employee by protecting the workspace. And that helps you understand how to organize, guide, and automate a lot of the protective measures that we've talked about, and give a little bit of a vision to the future that you can share with the folks that you work with, and talk about some things to help make this all better for all of us moving forward. And
Kurt,
definitely share those thoughts with others.
I didn't mean to interrupt you. How can folks find that blog, if you would direct people?
If you go out to citrix.com/blogs, that's Citrix, and search for protecting the employee by protecting the workspace, you'll find that.
Excellent. I will look for that and encourage all our listeners. Any other thoughts? Anything else?
Yeah, really go back and reflect on the identify, protect, detect, respond, recover, and think about that very personally. And yeah, definitely engage in some additional conversation, and get out there and share this info. Talk to your neighbors, talk to your coworkers, talk to your customers about what they're doing as well, and make sure that we're all learning and growing through this together. It's a new world for all of us. So don't feel alone. You've got a lot of help.
Excellent advice. Thank you for being on the program. I'll add to that first off, check out NIST, which you mentioned earlier, to be sure to do just what Kurt said. Talk to everyone. If you are writing your information security policies and procedures, you want to bring your employees in. That's a time to brainstorm and work together, because they'll see things that you don't see, or things that happen on their particular position that maybe you don't do. It's also, if you're at home, you're probably not going to write an information security policy and procedure, but you need to bring the family in, especially if you're doing work at home. Kids, this is my work computer. There can't be any kind of play on this. There are things.
Talk about the boundaries.
Exactly. I will mention, and I probably should have thought of this earlier, but I didn't. I've got a book in pre-publication called Steps to a Safer Organization. That's my working title. I'm almost done. So I think that'll be the final title. It actually goes through a lot of this with exercises at each chapter, at the end of each chapter, on how to build an information security policy and procedure. It's not going to be an in-depth. This is not for IT people. This is for the small to mid-sized business that the owner, as you mentioned earlier, is wearing a lot of hats. And so he doesn't have time to do a full business continuity plan, though I reference that and I encourage everyone to do that. At least this is a start. And so the idea is is there things you can do? In that, I talk about how to interview vendors, outside vendors, people that do this for a living, what questions to ask, and things that are helpful to the person that's not in IT. So that'll be available on Amazon, I'm hoping in May. So hopefully
Great.
that, and it's, I believe the title will be Steps to a Safer Organization. We are just about out of time. Kurt, I want to thank you for being on the program today. You bring such a wealth of information. I know you work for Citrix, and I should have asked this before. Would you want people to reach you for any reason, or should they just go to the citrix.com/blog?
Take a look at the blog. It's really going to give some insights on how we can move forward in a lot of ways. But yeah, if you're an enterprise looking for some ways to do this for your employee base, you can reach out to me on LinkedIn.
Okay, excellent. Well, thank you so much. Thank you, folks, for listening to us today and being with us. I hope you'll join us every opportunity on the Information Playground. Thank you.